What's up, wonderful people? It's your boy Ryan Verdon. It's the Antidote. So happy to be here with you. Let me make sure these folks over here on Instagram get to join us. Bam, there they are. So you could join us on YouTube. You can join us on Instagram. You can see this on the YouTube channel after we cut it up into some segments. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it, trying to build this community. And so truly, every like, every subscription, every time you share, it is a plus. It is an amazing day. It is May Day, one of my favorite days in the whole world. International Workers Day. I am from Minneapolis, and so if you're from Minneapolis and you're watching this, you know the May Day parade was such a source of joy. It was such a source of community and connection, and it informs so much of how I understand the world, how I understand what's possible, how I understand who I'm supposed to be in relationship and community with. And so happy May Day to everybody out there. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're recognizing that workers run the world. And without workers, we ain't got a whole lot. We do have a whole lot to cover today. And we have a fantastic guest that I'm going to bring in a second to talk about May Day, to talk about workers, and really to talk about immigration, because so often May Day gets tied to immigrant rights. And there's a reason for that, but I don't want to spoil that and go off on a little tangent right now. I'm gonna wait for our guest to come in and talk about that. And what a time, because I'm not the only one talking about it. These goofballs are at the administration are also obsessed with immigration and labor. And there is no other goofball more equipped to show his ass than the one, the only Stephen Miller. So I want y'all to see what he said today. Here we go. We're going to get started. Welcome to the Antidote. Let me make sure this is up here. And then bam. Here we go. Add the stage. Let's go like this. Hold on. Let me make sure that this is good. Add to stage. There we go. That's what I want to do. And
also fighting to get critical race theory out of our school districts. Children will be taught to love America. Children will be taught to be patriots. Children will be taught civic values for schools that want federal taxpayer funding. So as we close the Department of Education and we provide funding to states, we are going to make sure that these funds are not being used to promote communist ideology. For any nation to be successful, it cannot teach its children to hate themselves and to hate their country. So these are a few of the areas in which President Trump has fought the cancerous communist woke culture that was destroying this country, where we were led to believe that men were women, that women were men, that racial discrimination was good, that merit was bad, and that safety and physical security mattered less than the feelings of liberal ideologues. The president has also fought to return the Department of Justice to its core mission of protecting public safety and locking up violent criminals, instead of using the Department of Justice to target conservatives, to target Christians, to target people of faith. The last administration
he's hitting all the high notes
and shamefully used the power of the Justice Department to go after law-abiding Americans, in particular Trump supporters, conservatives, and Christians. That persecution has ended. The Department of Justice and the FBI are back in the business of going after bad guys, of going after gangs, of going after criminals, and keeping Americans safe. Let me just conclude before taking questions by noting that when you look at the sweep of the first 100 days, every single crisis that has afflicted America for years, sometimes decades, sometimes generations, this president has fought head on. He has taken on every entrenched power structure and system all across this government, this swamp, this town. That includes, of course, the DOGE efforts to slash corrupt, wasteful government spending, graft, and corruption, and to stop billions of taxpayer dollars from going to radical left NGOs. These are left-wing nonprofits that are used to advance illegal immigration, to advance open borders, to advance gender ideology, and to advance all of this insanity that has been turning our country in the wrong direction for so many years. President Trump took head on the trade crisis afflicting this country with the destruction of our manufacturing and industrial base, the shameful betrayal of the American worker by Joe Biden and the globalists that sent all of our supply chains overseas. He took head on the catastrophe of mass, unlimited illegal immigration that was turning us into a failed third world state, and achieved the lowest level of illegal immigration in recorded history without even a close second. He took on the economic crisis afflicting this country by reopening American energy, by defeating inflation, by lowering gas prices, by ending the onslaught and reversing the onslaught of federal regulation, by reopening coal, shale, oil, natural gas, and fighting now for the largest tax cut and reform and the largest deregulation reform and the largest energy reform in American history. These are just some of the things that have ushered in the new golden age, along with his fight to restore the peace that we had for 4 years under the previous administration before Joe Biden sunk this planet into bloodshed and war in the Middle East, in Europe, and rising tensions in Asia. President Trump, in every area of conflict around the globe, has been fighting to restore peace, security, stability, harmony. So he inherited an economic catastrophe, a border catastrophe, a public safety catastrophe, and a cultural catastrophe. And in every case, he has reversed those catastrophes and brought America into the new golden age. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions you have.
Well, here we are. Whew, my man hit all the high notes, y'all. He hit all the classics. He hit on illegal immigration, threw in a little trans hate in there. We gotta close this. Yeah, that is Stephen Miller, and thank God I do not have to wade through all this nonsense by myself. I have the one, the only Professor Nolan Cabrera with us again. We're gonna welcome him. What's up, Nolan? How you doing, brother? Happy May Day.
Happy May Day, bro. Happy May Day, man.
Man, not to start with a wham, but white men like Stephen Miller are on their thing today. That was a press conference from today. Help us make sense of it, man. What are your would love to hear just your reaction to that.
Well, the first one, and I'm gonna do this because it dates you and me. If you go all the way back to that track Super Solstice, I think it was on Warren G, right?
Yes.
I talked so much, yes, I got halitosis. The BS he was spewing was a consistent, like I started writing down all the lies. I stopped. I couldn't keep up because
you can't keep up with them.
You can't keep up, and it's one of those things and that's the danger of this administration, is that they tell so many lies. Right? It was sort of like when Biden would lie, or when his press secretary would be like, "Oh, the president is in excellent mental health," and then they talk about his trade policy. Like there was like a couple of bold-faced lies in there, and then they would try to get to some truth, but it was all this stuff. This is just lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. So, no, off the top of my head, number one, I know this. I'm at College of Education. I'm in schools all the time, and I teach critical race theory.
Right.
Any one of my seminars has maybe 10, 12 students in it. I'm in an institution where critical race theory is maybe taught 4 or 5 different spaces across campus, in an institution of 53,000, and it's supposed to be for graduate students primarily. So this whole idea, it's just a straw person argument. It just doesn't exist. But that's the strategy. That is the underlying strategy, is when you can take things that people don't know and amplify it, it makes them afraid. And when they're afraid, they do stupid things like vote for Trump. Right. Then, in the same way that I think I was really, it was fascinating to me about how much a critical lens to society is seen as hating America, hating our society, all this stuff. And what's fascinating for me about that, because it's a rhetorical device that they use all the time. Like if I say, "Wow, we were a country that was founded on the enslavement of black folk and the theft and physical and cultural genocide of indigenous peoples, which are just historical facts. All of a sudden you're hating America. And it's like, I keep thinking about this and I'm like, if I applied that ethic to my child, right? He steps
Right.
out of line. But I say, no, because I love you. Everything you do and everything you've done and everything you're going to do in the future is perfect and wonderful and beautiful. That would be me being neglectful as a parent. That would be me actually not loving my child because I'm not trying to push him to be better when he steps out, right?
Right.
But all of this is just pure nonsense. And at the end of the day, it reminds me a lot of that movie, Thank You for Smoking, where the lobbyist for the tobacco companies, he was so good at framing debates because he doesn't actually notice how they don't say anything specific, right? It's just they were bad, ergo we are good, and
Right.
everything we do now is the best. By any indicator, our economy is in a free fall. The stock market, which I really don't care about. I mean, I'm not.
It's never been a measure for my people on how the economy is, or how we distributing resources was never the stock market where we went to.
Exactly, but at the same time, there is something about that like, when
Sure.
it tumbles like that, and like even the capitalist class is going, oh my God, this is not good, right?
Yeah.
It's all smoke and mirrors and lies, and then when because again, you don't have to have any due process for folks. You just have to label them as an illegal, a gang member, a terrorist. That's all you got to do, and it makes it so you can do anything with it. But let's flip it on its head. Let's say, okay, fine, you're not in charge anymore. This is okay. We're okay with
Right.
this. Fine. Stephen Miller, you terrorized families. And he literally did. That's exactly what he does. He's just this
Absolutely.
he's this, nasty little, excuse me, I don't want to cuss.
Oh, you can cuss on here, man.
Yeah, I guess FCC is not going to.
We'll slap the explicit lyrics thing in the corner.
But remember back in the day, that showed you where all the good content was.
I was about to say, I remember being like, man, I hope they let me buy this CD.
Exactly. But no, but that dude, all he does is if we flipped it and said, okay, fine, this dude is terrorizing our communities, which is what he does. That's explicitly what he has set out to do his entire life. Even when he was those videos when he was in high school and was like, why should I have to pick up trash? We have Mexicans to do that and all that nonsense.
Yeah.
Now he can terrorize these people in the sense of me. What do we have? 3 kids, one of whom, all 3 are U.S. citizens, one of whom was in cancer treatment,
Stage 4 cancer treatment.
Exactly, in being deported with their mother. Okay, fine. We flip it on its head. You terrorized our people. We're going to deport you. Oh, you're a U.S. citizen? Sorry, it doesn't matter because you're a terrorist. They would never, ever, ever consider that with the shoes on the other foot, that it would be okay to deport Steve Bannon and or Donald Trump or any of the Trump kids or any of these cats or Stephen Miller, any of these cats who are involved in it. It's ludicrous for them to think that this would actually apply to them in some meaningful way, and so it's totally okay. But that, in many respects, is the caucasity of whiteness. Is that it works for some, but it doesn't work for us because you have that white immunity or the protection, or the complexion of protection for the collection, as Paul Mooney used to say.
Yep. Well, and I think so. That's gets us to where I want to talk about. You see on the banner there, some folks watching this might be like, "What do you mean he brags about white nationalism? He didn't say anything about race necessarily, right? He used woke ideology. He talked about undocumented people, but that's what they're counting on.
Exactly.
They're counting on the idea that in our heads, and by our I mean people who look like me, that we imagine our communities as only people who look like me. Exactly. Right. And so when he says American, he's counting on white folks being like, yeah, get those brown people, get those people with those funny sounding names and who pray to a different God or who speak a different language, get them out. Yep. Right. And that's and critical race theory opens the door obviously just by the name, right? For a critical analysis of how race has operated in the shaping of America.
Exactly.
And there's something at the root. And I refuse it. A lot of people will say, like, oh, white folks don't know. They just don't know if we educate. I used to be one of those, like, hey, if we just educate, things will be better. Once you know better, you'll do better.
Yep.
And the reality is that that's just not true. Right?
It's sometimes.
That's what I'm saying. It's not the strategy. It can be the strategy.
Exactly.
Right? Because there are people like Stephen Miller who know.
They don't. They know exactly.
He knows. He's articulated. Him, Chris Rufo has articulated. We are going to lump all these things that we understand are not related to one another.
Yep.
We're going to lump them together, and we're going to make people fear them.
Exactly.
And it serves as everything, because our community, how whiteness has always operated, is by creating community around whiteness, which has also and whiteness was the prereq for access to a mainstream economy, which is how we get to why are we talking about this on May Day, on International Worker Day? Because the construction of race in our communities in this country has always been deeply tied to who we imagine as our racial compatriots, our communities, right? And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that and how race and labor shape what's going on here.
So I think you just hit the nail on the head. But like you said, it's I found it really profound watching James Baldwin debate maybe like 60 years ago, where basically the is on a talk show, and the guy, I can't remember who he was. It wasn't when he was talking to the arts conservative of Oxford. It was like mainstream TV here, and the guy was trying to say, no, basically there's a basic goodness in the white man's culture, and Baldwin was like, no, like I can't. You say these things and you expect me to believe them and to buy into them and hope because of my better angels that they're going to be true. But I look and I see that your labor unions are lily white. That
right.
With as Malcolm X said, that the most segregated hour in America is high noon on Sunday. That that the violence that's incurred on my community is just an anomaly, and then you expect me to just drop this facade when all this evidence is here in front of me. And what's been fascinating for me with that then is then you flip it on its head, and you notice how little structural support ostensibly people of color labor movements received. Like when the United Farm Workers, which was ostensibly Latinos and Filipinos, there was some support on the outside, but it wasn't like a major rallying cry within it. And we've seen this, that so many of our labor unions, and keep in mind, I'm trying to say this with all respect, in the same way of a loving critique earlier, of saying, like, I respect in the context of capitalism why folks are so protective of their unions. It's so hard to build that. And if we go back to Roediger's The Wages of Whiteness, think about if folks had tried to give up their whiteness, not be so invested in their whiteness, how much stronger our labor unions would be. And actually Cesar Chavez, really instructive along those lines, because and this pisses me off to no end, you have the selective reading of history, where the conservative right is constantly saying, well, why are you liberals loving Cesar Chavez? Or no, how do they say it? I can't even pronounce Cesar Chavez. Why do you?
I was gonna say, there's no way they say it right.
No, that's why it took me a moment. And so, why do you love him so much? He hated illegal immigrants. And that's true to an extent. It's sort of like if you look at early Malcolm X, all white people are blue-eyed devils.
Yeah.
And then you see an evolution. Chavez went through a similar evolution where he said, no, our union has, like, these people are only scabs meant to undercut our union. And then he evolved and said, wait, they're integral. We need to bring them in instead of kick them out. And I think it's easier for him to have that kind of an awakening relative to a lot of our more mainstream unions, because because they've had the intersection of race and class together more apparently. But I will say one thing that I appreciated so much was that the union that Garcia. There's so many people who are hurt.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
There you go.
And
Yeah, that his trade union,
the United Auto Workers,
they even said our brother is in arms and it has been taken from us, and he's in El Salvador, and we demand him back.
Absolutely.
I don't imagine 60 years ago that trade union president would have said that same thing. And so it's not enough, but I love the progress that we're making in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a history of, and so for the viewers who might not know, I want to provide a brief. And I'm gonna try to keep it brief. If you know me, you know I get to getting on, and then before it look up, it'll be 40 minutes later. But I know we got a hard stop, and I want to talk about so much. But the thing you need to understand about what we're talking about, the undergirding here, is that when race was created, and I mean that quite literally, when the category of whiteness was created, it was in response to what we would now call a multiracial rebellion in Virginia, where working people, enslaved Africans, indentured Europeans, were like, hey, we're getting the short end of the stick. This is a raw deal. Landowning elitists like William Berkeley, yes, who the college is named after and all that, and England is not doing is not promising us what we said we were promised. So they busted Virginia's ass and Berkeley's ass for a whole year, gave it to them. They had to send the armada and everything, and they end up putting that rebellion down. It's called Bacon's Rebellion. I won't get into how history talks about them dishonestly, that event, because they never talk about the most important thing that happens from it, which is the creation of race. It's the idea, it's the recognition that, hey, these working people who have common cause, who share, are living a common experience, and don't like us, right? Who we are oppressing, who we are exploiting. If they get together, there's way more of them than there are of us, and it's problems. And so that was where race, whiteness particularly, gets entered into the conversation. We see anti-miscegenation laws start to ban what we would now call interracial marriage. Really, it's just marriage between white people and anybody else. They didn't care if like an African and a native person married. They didn't care about none of that. Exactly. And that was key then to the mainstream economy, right? It was that. And then we see, and Nolan brought up Rodigger's work in working towards whiteness. He talks about European ethnic groups being a sort of in between, right? Labor, they're getting exploited and they're demanding changes. And labor unions were often the vehicle that they did. And unfortunately, not enough labor unions did embrace a multiracial ethic, did embrace a sort of what I would call a class consciousness, truly a class consciousness.
Yeah, exactly.
Where they say, hey, our material interests are aligned with people, these other groups of people, which is why I love, and my man wasn't perfect, and this organization isn't perfect, so this is a huge caveat, but the Wobblies and the IWW and Eugene Debs they refused to segregate. They were they were a multiracial union. You have folks like Miles Horton who refused to segregate Highlander, right? It was a space where folks could come together. And so we're seeing some of that, right? When like you talked about with the labor union president demanding that Kilmar Abrego Garcia be returned. But that brings us to the next thing I want to hear your thoughts on, brother, is there's always this need for labor in a capitalist economy, right? You have to have a labor force. You have to have a proletariat, as Marx will call it. And historically, people who look like me, Europeans, have used their labor to increase their cultural capital, the wages of whiteness, as Du Bois will call it, right? And we're seeing that move farther. That's becoming a thing in the past, especially as industry has left, right? And so now there's conflict where white folks aren't able to do that, right? And more they're trying to say, hey, but wait, what's special about what do we get? There's increasingly less of the pie. So what do we get based on our whiteness?
Exactly.
Which is opening them up for for this anti-immigrant rhetoric, right? Which is why people can say, "Oh, I hate Trump," but he won on immigration, right? And even there were Latinx people, there were Black folks, there were immigrant communities who were like, "Oh, he's not." They believed him when he said they're not talking about us, but they really are, right? And so, how do you deal with this idea of like, "Yo, we need you as labor," right? Ain't nobody else picking the fruits, the vegetables, doing the work that immigrants are doing, migrant workers are doing, and yet at the same time they're saying, "We don't want you here. We're going to deport you."
Absolutely.
How do you make sense of that?
Yeah. Well, like you said, I mean, just the very notion of this, the idea of being an American has always been a very insulary idea for the longest time, right? Like, I mean, you can even go back. I know it's historical fiction, but like Gangs of New York is actually a really cool thing, you know, like where you've got,
Absolutely.
but the rhetoric, the way that Daniel Day-Lewis's character, as a recent migrant himself, but would always shit on the Irish and be like, you know, we need this for real Americans. You know, it's like
Absolutely.
it goes back centuries trying to do this as who's a real American. But what we by doing this, and it is, I love Roediger's kind of idea of like this divide and conquer strategy, because if you mislabel who's responsible for for the pain that you're suffering, and that's really what it is. We take the pain as a real thing, because capitalist exploitation and white supremacy, they freaking hurt. They hurt your life opportunities.
Yeah.
They lower your life chances. All these different things that happen, and so we have to be really clear that all of that on the very base material level is real, right? But it's I'm in 90s mode today. But like, do you remember that cat
I'm here
Elliott
for
Smith?
it.
You remember Elliott Smith, the singer-songwriter who died of the heroin overdose?
I do, yes.
Okay, so he had this one phrase. I'm gonna screw it up a little bit, but he said like something. Don't you think you're being used? Because without an enemy, our anger gets confused, and that's what the right is really good at, is identifying this enemy. Now we would say, why don't the Democrats identify who the enemy is accurately? Because they're complicit in it through both white supremacy and capitalism. And this is where it gets really tricky. And this is why the Dems keep selling us out over and over and over again. That like when it comes to border protections, that happened under Clinton and Feinstein at the head in the early 90s.
Absolutely.
And we forget about that because they kept trying to do this, you know, this globalist expansion of trade. And one of the things that I actually really like, this is going to sound weird, I love talking to objectivists, the people who follow the teachings of Ayn Rand really closely. About this is going to blow this
Ayn Rand, look, we got enough time to get into Ayn Rand, bro.
I know. It hurts me to say this, but I saw this strange confluence. Okay, they actually say, because you know, if it's individual, they're SOBs, but they're principled SOBs.
Okay.
And so
I can give them that. I can give them that.
And so they say that like if you have absolute individual freedom and free market capitalism, then yes, you should have an absolute free flow of capital, and you should have an absolute free flow of people as well. And unfortunately, the second part is not what Clinton, Bush 2, Obama, Trump, what any of them have advocated for in any way, shape, or form, because they keep saying we need to get tough on the border, without realizing. And then they've been exporting all of our trade overseas,
right?
Which, you know, and that was done under sort of this neoliberal ideology, but not allowing people to move freely. And so you end up having these areas where all of the industry has just been taken away, and so folks are hurting. And then they're like, and then what, they don't really see all the inner workings of capitalism. And so then they rely on a couple of things. One, they see brown folks laboring. Yeah. And so they're like, that person must have stolen my job. Think about the white entitlement embedded in that phrase, right? Right.
And just like economic illiteracy, right? To the idea that somebody steals jobs as opposed to a owner or a worker or a boss or a landowner. Exactly. Choosing who costs less, whose
Yes.
labor costs less. That's all that's about.
Exactly. And then not only that, it was only in the 80s and early 90s that multinational corporations had to say, like, we have to squeeze every last penny out of this that we can. So even though we have record profits, we still need to cut down our labor force. And it makes
Right.
people expendable. And unfortunately, we're so arrogant in America. What is it? We either have millionaires or people who haven't quite become millionaires yet. We're always aspiring to and unfortunately, so we identify more with Elon Musk than we do with our brothers and sisters and non-binary folk who are actually struggling on the material level. Because at the end of the day, like there was this whole thing about government inefficiency and all this Doge nonsense.
Which
At
it
the
turns out has
day,
cost us more.
of course it does. Well, because when you take away all of the folks that are doing the oversight,
Yeah.
then we lose billions of dollars because the capitalists are going to keep exploiting us. And
Right.
then they're going to play every loophole. They're going to find every way to, add a little, like you go to the bank and they say, okay, oh, you overdrew your account. You owe us $5 more. It's like, I can't pay you $5 because I just overdrew my account. I'm broke. That's why I can't
Now it's my turn to get a 90s reference. That's like most. If I had ID, I wouldn't need ID.
Exactly.
What?
Wait, was that most or Common?
That's most. It's on a song with Common.
That's I was getting my see, there we go. But yeah, so my whole point here is that we're taught to, well, let me back up. Also notice, and this is why it's tough. But one thing that the previous election did show is that there's a massive discrepancy in the amount of time and energy that people can and will invest in learning about the political issues, right?
Yeah.
And so you get these big picture ideas, but you don't see the nuance. You don't see, how the sausage is made. And so people understand, they're like, well, and I understand this on a ground level, like, shoot, I was talking with my mechanic about this a couple of days ago. Like, why, he's like, well, why should the fat cats in Washington be able to do X, Y, and Z when I'm sitting here just trying to run an honest business here and I'm not getting subsidies, bail, all this stuff. And I understand that on a very deep level. So he supported Doge all the way around. And I was like, but dude, why do we need to be, giving billions of dollars in government subsidies to SpaceX? Like how does going to space in an Elon Musk, that's basically, him comparing, genital size with Jeff Bezos doing,
Right.
I'm more endowed, you're more, all this nonsense. Like I kept saying, why should we be giving billion? And he's like, it's not. I said, no, come on, just. I was like, come on, please, just admit one time that you're wrong. And he he was kind of thinking about it for a little bit, and he hasn't quite come around. But at least that seed was planted. Like, when you're talking about, because really what it's been doing is stripping away government oversight. And so that allows people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and people of the billionaire class fewer regulations so that they don't actually have to be accountable to anybody, which is just a disaster in and of itself, number one. And then number two, their own precious investments, they're not touched. In terms of government efficiency, I mean, Elon said early on that, and all of my contracts are up as well. Really, show me one Elon contract that got canceled. One.
And more than that, he gained contracts.
Exactly.
He gained contracts, right?
Exactly.
And I think what you're touching on, I think is such an important point, especially if you're a white person out there listening right now. It's if you doubt the organizing power or force or how salient the power of whiteness is in terms of what we think about, Elon Musk and this anti-immigrant rhetoric offers a prime example. Elon Musk is a South African. He worked illegally in the United States in 1995, and he openly jokes about this. He would theoretically he would be deported today, and he would be one of those criminals and bad people that Trump is talking about. Instead, we have the exact opposite, right? We have a very realistic argument that could be made that he's the one running the show, right?
Exactly.
And so when we think about, I don't want people to reduce this conversation, and I know you're not saying this, but it's really important for me. While we are talking about labor and we're talking about capitalism and class, all of this is deeply tied to our racial imaginations, right?
Totally is.
Which is, and when I say, going all the way back to when I say Stephen Miller hit all the highlights, notice he threw out communism. The only people talking about communism right now are people who hate communism. They need it so bad. And here's my thing, and this is from somebody who I identify more with communism than I do probably any other economic system. But I want to talk about, why is communism so scary? And its history, right? And I think it has to do with the communal nature, right? That's fundamentally anti-American, unless there's a tragedy, right? Then hey, if you can donate to the Red Cross and do all that, look at how we take care of each other. But if we ever have to be like, hey, maybe you shouldn't GoFundMe for your diabetes prescription, maybe we should just take care of you. Now all of a sudden you're a communist. Right. And like, same with maybe, hey, people are coming to this country and all they're doing is contributing. All they're doing is working at the jobs that are the least desirable, that are the most open to exploitation, often are victims of wage theft, can't access the protections of citizenship that at one point in time, depending on the administration, exists. And we are okay with the way that we're talking about them. Like, we have such a competitive individual mindset. That's my take. I would love to hear yours.
Absolutely. I want to backtrack real quick though on one thing. Please. So just give me 1 second, because you hit up such an incredibly important point, and I got a really important story about this, but I got to kind of talk about it broadly to protect the brothers' identity, right?
Yeah.
So there's a dude who he's a driver around town. He was helping me get to the airport. I know this cat, and he's been in this country 26 years. 28 years ago, he was in Morocco and was filing for divorce, and then came here, right?
Okay.
He's driving me to the airport, and he's saying he was really down. I was like, dude, what's going on? Like, he's usually just pretty good spirits. We've known each other for years, just had this little rapport. And he said that the federal government is investigating. He's like a naturalized citizen, and they're going back through his paperwork, because when he filled it out initially, it said he was married. And when his divorce was finalized, he didn't update it to say now that he's divorced. This is a cat. Exactly. No, and this cat's like 10 years older than I am. And even though he's got family in Morocco, he's like, he doesn't really have a place to stay. Everything is diffused, all this stuff. So this dude, after 26 years in this country, is facing deportation because of this nonsense, for literally not updating a form, instead of what Elon Musk did, where he's like, oh, I overstayed and I was here and I was working, it was illegal and all this stuff,
Yeah.
And that is the audacity of whiteness. That is the caucasity of it right there, that the rules apply until they don't. And when you have,
absolutely,
when you're a billionaire son of an emerald miner as a white South African, it's totally cool to break the rules. Here in Tucson, if you're a Canadian immigrant, which it's like when people say Canadian, they see like a Justin Trudeau. I know there's a total mix and all this stuff. So I'm not trying to homogenize, but point being that those cats don't have to deal with all that stuff. And it just kills me, because I'm seeing it on the material level. And even if he stays, you've got this dude who's barely making above minimum wage, having to hire an attorney. And we all know the law may be lying, but it ain't free. So
right.
So what's so scary about communism? I think that there's a couple of things embedded in it. One, and we on the more progressive side of things, we do need to be serious about this. There were some royally messed up things with the USSR and
100%.
Exactly. And I think we kind of gloss over the sort of the totalitarian nature of folks, and there is something legitimately scary, about that. Okay, and so when I was a kid and the Russian national wrestling team came to my town, and like they were doing seminars, we were putting them up, and you see them just like something like having a pair of Levi's, and they're like, oh my, there's this little sense of freedom. You can see how much they were under pressure. So I don't think that we can entirely say that fear of communism is entirely just in the imaginary in the way that whiteness is. But this is like huge. I think that the big reason why it's a convenient sort of a convenient sort of red herring is that it's the incredible threat of a good example. That you have this ability to, like, it highlights a bunch of the underlying lies that we tell each other on a regular basis, that through hard work you're going to succeed, that meritocracy exists. I mean, Pete Hegseth, great. Yeah.
I've been railing against Pete Hegseth for the last few weeks on here because he's from Minnesota, and I feel it's my moral obligation.
It's so that giving the billionaire class and multimillionaire class massive tax breaks that they don't need is in some way going to raise all boats, and that free market capitalism will be the savior of all of us, and that like all of these things are just lies that communism in many respects rebuts. It says no, we can actually do this in a different way. There is so much wealth that is here, right? That it doesn't, that it doesn't have to be this way. That for all intents and purposes, the idea of a billionaire it simply shouldn't exist. As long as as long as there are people who are hungry, as long as there are people who are struggling to get educated, as long as all these different things are happening, there should not be a billion, because all that means is that you're hoarding resources, you're hoarding wealth while other people are suffering. And then they say, well, I earned it. Absolutely not. If you look at how many Amazon vehicles are going up and down your street on a regular basis, without us and our tax base creating those streets in the first place, Jeff Bezos doesn't have anywhere to take his folks. He can't do it unless they exploit the collective resources that we have done together, and also the labor that we are putting into that. And you think that you deserve $150 billion? No. Pay your driver a reasonable amount, invest, allow your company to be taxed so that we can keep and maintain those roads. Make sure that you're investing in our schools so that you can, it requires a reformulation of sort of our underlying ideological structure, but it undercuts that rugged individualism, which was never there in the first place.
Never there in the first place. And I think that's the thing. What I tell my students all the time is, to your point of like, at its most basic, right? Like, communism is an economic system just like capitalism is. And totalitarianism and authoritarianism are government systems just like democracy is.
Exactly.
And so we can have conversations about what they align and all that, but my point in bringing that up is the opposite of communism is not democracy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, like they're not the same systems.
You're talking an economic versus a government system.
Yeah, exactly.
It's and so apples and oranges, and you're trying to put them together. And
the successful collusion or like collapsing of that, right, in our public in the dialogue and discourse is, I think it's just something where, I mean, we're still seeing it's 2025, and Stephen Miller's talking about communist woke ideology. And if you go and you talk to somebody and you say, hey, do you think that, workers should be paid a decent wage? Do you need a little bit more? And they're going to be like, yeah, that's what I voted. And ironically, that's what I voted for Trump to do. Lower taxes and give me more money.
Exactly. And that's actually a tax break that works. When you see more progressive economists, they actually say that, yeah, tax breaks actually do work if you focus them on low and medium income people, because when you
We
give them that,
spend money.
we spend money, and we spend money on the things that are our everyday things. So like that mom and pop store up the street that, I can't spend on right now because my paycheck is, too small. Now I can invest in you. I can actually be there, and it builds up our communities in the process. What
Right.
doesn't work is trying to give a $5 trillion discount to folks who don't freaking need it.
Right.
And that's the biggest thing that we have to keep understanding is, and it just drives me nuts how I loved seeing Elon being like, Tim Walz is a bully, and he takes pride in Tesla stock falling, and he's just such a bad person. It's like, bro, like, if you weren't such a horrible person, your company would be thriving right now. The company that people love is Ben and Jerry's. Those cats throw
Right.
down to the community. Arizona iced tea. They say we could make more money, but we want people, just our everyday people, to be able to, we're going to try to keep it
Yeah.
as, away from inflation as possible, and we don't need more.
Right.
But those are the anomalies. The system is
Absolutely.
set up for multinational corporations to be. Well, I mean, that was the that documentary back in the early 2000s about, the corporation. Basically, if it was a
Yeah.
person, because citizens, because the corporations are given the same rights as
First
citizens.
Amendment side. Yeah.
Yeah, that basically it would be a sociopath. No consideration of people, no consideration of the environment. It's money is the bottom line, and at the end of the day, that's why these contradictions in Marxism that Marx talks about are all coming to fruition, because
Yeah.
you don't have to. It's the logical extrapolation of capitalist over consumption and exploitation
Yeah.
in the process.
And I want to be clear. And what I tell people too is, one, I'm an academic. I study economic and racial theory, and so I talk in terms of like socialism, communism, capitalism. I recognize we are in the 21st century. We're almost a quarter way through the 21st century and live in a world that those cats couldn't even consider. Adam Smith and Karl Marx were not talking about
Yes.
AI in the way that it's gonna down it is right now, right? Like, so I'm not saying we have to choose one. I'm saying
Yeah.
that the
Oh, no.
principles that undergird what's
Yeah.
happening, right? Either we're gonna have an economic system that cares about people a little bit,
Yeah.
or one that cares about growth and consumption and the bottom line over everything. And I remember a few years ago, I was guest lecturing in a business ethics class. So you can imagine how that went. And literally, there were overwhelming majority of the students in that class argued that their ethics were in what's in the best interest of stakeholders. That would drive that was the ethical framework that they had.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm saying that not to be like, look at how bad these kids are or these students.
Oh.
I'm saying that is the framework that is being used. That is what's saying, like, no, this is what ethics is. It's not, and we're gonna see with Mangione, this trial, like, and I'm not condemning anything, but I'm saying, like, you can't continue to keep life-saving medicine from people and expect people not to buck back.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you saw that with that tech bro, I can't remember what his name is, who bought up all the AIDS medication and then jacked up the price a couple $1,000%. And
that's right. Yeah.
And he still doesn't think there's anything wrong with that. It's like,
right.
I mean, that's the definition of a sociopath. Like this is where we're at. And I mean, if it sounds hippie woo woo for us to care about each other, then I'll throw on my Birkenstocks and tie dye, because I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like,
that's what we got to do.
Exactly. But then remember who the ultimate hippy dippy person was Jesus. I mean, at the end of the day, the only time he got royally pissed off at folk, he wasn't pissed off at the Roman soldiers who were taking him away. He even forgave Judas, who turned on him. He wasn't pissed off at the sex workers and the lepers and all this stuff. The only people were the money changers who corrupted the nature of his father's temple. That was it.
That's when he geeked. Yep.
Exactly. And so now we have all this nonsense about, I mean, shoot, they're going to be able to fund Christian charter schools, because let's be honest, it's Christian charter schools with government money, which is a huge
Absolutely.
violation of the separation of church and state. And folks keep saying it under the guise of that, we need more religion to combat our moral decay. And I'm like, nah, son, we need more actual Jesus in modern day Christianity. That's where we need it.
Listen, if Jesus came back today, he'd be deported for being a threat to national security because he'd be talking about free Palestine and talking and saying what's going on.
Absolutely. And then the same thing
Right.
with all the erasure of historical memory. We do the same thing with Dr. King, right? It's like,
Absolutely.
oh my God, the number of times in the mainstream media that I see, Dr. King said, we want to be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. So Dr. King was colorblind and I'm living out his legacy. It's like BS. You read one half of one line, and I'm sitting here, look at the totality of the man's of his history, his legacy, his speeches that he gave. I mean, he was an anti-racist, democratic socialist with a radical ethic of love and a deep distrust
anti-war,
and also said that the United States is the biggest purveyor of violence in the world. That's the legacy. And so we also forget that inconvenient truth that something like when he was assassinated, 76% of white folk had a disfavorable rating of him, right?
Yeah. And he was the most dangerous man. J. Edgar Hoover said he was the most dangerous man in America. It was,
Exactly.
FBI sending him "go kill yourself" letters.
Exactly. And yet, yes, he was a philanderer, and they tried to use that against him to undermine the entire movement. But at the same time, it's sort of like, my gosh, look, which of the guys in Washington attacking him weren't doing all that nonsense?
Well, and if we want to go skeletons and closets, let's talk about glass houses and all that. Yeah,
exactly.
And also, this is the part that kills me for white folks out there. Is like, even if you only got that part right, and you really took that to heart.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see what's happening now and say, oh, yeah, that's the content of that guy's character, of Pete Hegseth. That's who I want there, of Donald Trump. Of like, even again, we talked about this the last time we were on our own, on those own terms.
Yes.
You fail.
Absolutely.
Even on a meritocracy scale, you fail. You are the least meritocratic person that we could possibly think of. Like, y'all got the goofiest of goofies over here. Like kids who clearly, I don't know what Stephen Miller needed as a child. Like, I don't know what hugs he needed. I don't know what happened.
Yes.
But like, whatever it is, bro, you're not going to get it by hating and being as mediocre as you are. And you're mediocre.
Exactly. And that's why they had those tote bags that say, for BIPOC folk, carry yourself with the
confidence of a mediocre white man.
Exactly, of a mediocre white man. But the same thing. But then, you know what? Other folks, even our BIPOC brethren, try to emulate it, because Kash Patel is a mediocre FBI director. And, and you have these same things that keep popping up. All these folks are mediocre, but they kiss the ring and bend the knee. And that's, and sycophantery is the most important qualification right now.
Absolutely. You see the nonsense at the cabinet. It's funny that you talk about Kash Patel, because there's we could on a national level. You see Eric Adams, like, clearly quid pro quo. Hey, I'm gonna go to jail. Nah, I'll let you open up ICE and Rikers, and we'll do all that. Just drop these charges. And then I just found out today that Chief
the National Security Advisor.
Yeah, Walls.
Walls. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he went to the UN. But Chief Rondo, who was he was the chief of the Minneapolis police during the uprisings in Georgia. He has a book coming out talking about seeking justice for the murder of George Floyd. This dude was one of two people who saw the tape, who saw what happened, and co-signed that Floyd died of a medical emergency. It wasn't until Darnella Frazier put out on social media the video of what happened.
Yep.
And now this dude is out here selling books on it. And I'm like, we just don't have we don't have this systemic understanding. The values of whiteness and capitalism shaped so much of the waters that we live in. Totally. That we are and I see that, like, that's the damage, and it's damaging activists and organizing communities. It's damaging the left, because we don't take that. We're vicious with people and incompetent with systems too much, right? Where we don't understand this the impact that systems are having and how that impacts how we need to show up for people with some compassion, with some grace, and with some healing, right? Which is why we're doing the antidote. Hopefully, we can offer some of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it goes, and I know I keep saying this over and over and over again, but for me, it goes back to Adrienne Marie Brown's "We Will Not Cancel Us," because it's one of these things, and I love it to death. But we have so often that those who are in our immediate proximity are the ones that drive us nuts the most. And
Absolutely.
so, but then there's also not this reckoning with this systemic understanding, like you said. We're like there. And this is one of these things I just need kind of a slight internal check with my students, because you can make a social justice critique almost anywhere, because whiteness, capitalism, patriarchy, genderism, all these things are so embedded in.
Yeah.
The underlying question is, are you looking to get over? Or are you looking to lift someone up? Right? Are you saying that, in the spirit of we need each other in community, am I trying to tear you down, or are we trying to actually build something together? And a huge check on that becomes, okay, there was this BIPOC prof that said something was a little problematic, and I get that, and I don't discount that. And then my question would be, when was the last time that you got upset and organized and started complaining to the president of the university that actually created a racist policy or a transphobic policy, or just capitulated to the central administration? And so again, it doesn't undermine the critique, but it says, if you're only going after those that are in your immediate proximity, A, you don't have as big a proximity as you need to. B, you're not thinking systematically. And C, all you're going to end up doing is lighting up folks like us, when in fact we need each other to be able to do this work. And that's a tough and complicated approach to do this work.
It is. It requires all kinds of focus on relationship and all that. But it's also a good jump off point. You set me up perfectly all night, man. And I know you got to get out of here. So before you get out of here, I'm wondering, man, are you hopeful about the solidarity you're seeing? Like, again, this May Day, we talked before we went live. It feels like, there's Free Palestine protests happening along with immigrant rights protests, and it feels like there's some acknowledgement of the ways that all these freedom fights and battles are intertwined.
Exactly. Right? And that's exactly it. That it does occasionally make the analysis a little thin, but I would rather deal with that than deal with, if I had a nickel for every time from the 60s through the 90s. So I would talk to old cats, and then in my formative years, where I would hear, you can't say anything else because it distracts from us.
Right.
And one of the things that I loved, absolutely loved this, was there was a cat who was involved in the 60s blowouts, who I was talking with in the early 2000s. Very proud of the work that he did and that the collective did. But he confided in me and said, you know what? If I'm honest with you, the modern day activists are actually better than we were, even though we get the credit, because they're able to navigate multiple systems of oppression concurrently and that creates a wider net, and it gets them more power in the process, and it actually moves us toward more liberatory futures in that process.
I love that.
And that for me is everything, because it says, and it's not trying to say, oh, we're better, but because what I'm seeing also is that contemporary students, they do need a little bit more of a crash course in sort of the direct action methods, because they're so on their phones, and digital is like their area. That's so much better than me in that. And at the same time, the way that they're able to create these spaces is just a very natural extension of themselves, and being able to be in space and then to create these radical democratic imaginaries is incredible. And so I see so much potential there, because you're right. Like, without our without our white supremacist and neoliberal paradigms in the United States, we're not supporting a genocidal regime in Israel. And so all of these
Not at
are,
all.
they're absolutely, if we're not having the need for capitalist exploitation and concurrently with white supremacy, we're not able to leverage the xenophobic fears of, Juan and Jose as they're coming across the border. We see them as brothers who are here to work. And if there's a bad apple, then you don't, anyone who's been on a
Right.
farm knows, yeah, you want to get a bad apple out, but you know what? You don't take the whole bushel and throw that out in the process. You take the bad apple, you remove it.
Right.
But unfortunately, it's this ham-handed way of seeing everybody homogeneously as the enemy. And that's the
Yeah.
beauty of these spaces, is even when we disagree, there is no enemy within, as the way that Trump said it. We are all brothers and sisters in this struggle, and that makes it very powerful.
And I think that's probably the most revolutionary position that we can take, right? Is that we are going to truly embrace what Adrienne Maree Brown talks about, and We Will Not Cancel Us, of that we are all fully human. Problems, I'm problematic in a lot of ways, right? And I want to grow and I wanted all that. And I want to be able to do that with people who recognize my humanity and are going to hold me accountable. And those are the spaces where I think we're gonna see some real change as we show up and demand, like, Mahmoud Khalil's release, Ramesma Ozturk's release,
Yes.
demanding these, a stop to. I couldn't even wrap my head around. I told my students about the young kids deported, and then to have Marco Rubio and Hallman on the news talking about, we didn't deport those. The moms took them with them.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just it's so disingenuous and so dishonest. But it's also just exactly what you would expect from white capitalist patriarchy. In my mind, like, this is the fruition of everything that could possibly go bad, and the erosion of all the things that make us good is what we're seeing right now.
But I see it taking it one step further, and that's that even with, white supremacist, capitalist, neo-colonialist, heteropatriarchy in the past, George W. Bush, this hurts me to say it, God dang it, they're all politicians and they all try to spin their stuff in the positive way. But there was a certain grounding in reality, even when he's lying. This one just takes it to the next level. They are never wrong. They're the most righteous. And what's weird is, like, you could kind of see where Bush was going, like where he's, it's like, I want to invade Iraq because Saddam Hussein tried to kill my dad. And you could see he's actually has a plan. This is just chaos. There's no, and I don't even, I obviously there was the whole thing with, well, we're going to reduce these tariffs so the stock market is going to bounce back, but all y'all get your, do your buying now so that you can make, your $1 billion.
Yeah.
Obviously there's all sorts of insider trading and all this stuff, but I honestly don't think that was, I think that's more of a byproduct than the actual focus. And for right now, it just, there's not, there's nothing. Like, it just feels like, actually John Mulaney said it really well when he talked about, if you let a horse loose in a hospital, some crazy stuff is going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's really, and it's funny because he wrote that bit about the first Trump administration, and now we're seeing it really coming to fruition. And it's just, it's just, and I used to compare Trump to the Joker, where he'd be like, I'm an agent of chaos. But if you look at the Joker, even there were kind of underlying weird principles, a strategy, even though he'd say, do I look like I have a plan? Actually manifest, you kind of do.
Kind of, yeah.
And this dude, it's just like, well, it's like dealing with an impulsive 5-year-old, where they're like, I want ice cream for dinner and I don't want to go to bed and I'm going to do this and I'm not going to tie my shoes and I'm not going to put them on my jacket. I'm going to do this. It's like, it's just dealing with that constantly and then saying, oh, but everything they're doing is the most brilliant thing ever. And then
and it's like, that's the whole point of what they're supposed to be doing too. Like, the cabinet meetings and everything is just, they got the hats around with the Gulf of America and stuff. It's just like, this is the most absurd it would be a bad parody if it wasn't reality.
Exactly.
Like this would be a movie script that people like, we wouldn't. This is not feasible.
Absolutely, because
And here we are.
It's bizarre how But this
Yeah.
is also, I think you hit the nail on the head, though. That there is at the core of it a bunch of guys who grew up without love, without compassion, without any of this stuff. And you're just seeing it manifest. That the whole idea of wounded people wound others. You're seeing it right now because
Absolutely.
all the stuff from Donald Trump, with his dad, and and I mean, and then he becomes an image, not a person. To the point that
Right.
he didn't even want to name his son Don Jr. because, well, what if the kid's a loser? I don't want that to be my legacy. It's like that is some cold-blooded. That's wow.
You can't scream help me more loudly than that.
Exactly. But then
Yeah.
it seems like all these folks, Stephen Miller, etc. I mean, Steve Bannon. If that cat had gotten his contract as a screenwriter, and not been so hurt about it because I need my Hollywood, moment. It's like we wouldn't be dealing with so much of this nonsense. But so many of these
Right.
cats, exactly what they are. They have the entitlement of whiteness, which then leads them, when it doesn't manifest, and it doesn't also make them happy, that they take it out on the rest of us.
Right.
And so I can understand the psychology, but I don't condone it. I say, like, look, this is the enemy who we're dealing with, and we know where they're coming from, that anything that disagrees with them is going to be attacked and tried to be demolished. And at the same time, it's one of those things that they also show their weakness, because that's exactly, well, I mean, that is by definition a weak man. And I use man intentionally.
By definition.
By definition. Because if I said, Ryan, you're wrong about that, you'd be like, oh, well, let's think about that. What are we talking about? We'd engage in this.
I would be curious about that I don't.
Exactly. But then through that, we actually address our weaknesses, which is,
Right.
And then we grow and grow stronger in the process, and we grow stronger together, because I have to have a vulnerability to call you in on that, and you have to have a vulnerability to grow from that. And that is a strength in and of itself right there. But unfortunately, right now, strength is only through like these Andrew Tates and all these cats. And I literally had a dude call because he hadn't seen me before I shaved my head.
Yeah.
And he called me Andrew Tate today at the gym. And I was like, bro, this guy's a sex trafficker. And he's like,
just a terrible human being.
Exactly. And he's like, yeah. And actually he was doing, I found out later he was doing it because he likes poking at me a little bit for being on the left of center. And he's like, but he actually did realize, guy, he doesn't read. He's an idiot. He doesn't, he's a sex trafficker. He's just a horrible person.
Yeah.
And that actually the horrible person became the joke. But I was like, bro, let's not joke about that. Because
right. For real.
Yeah. Let's find something else,
Yeah.
How many other guys got this dude?
I was gonna say, if that's what we're told, that's a low bar for entry right there. For real.
Exactly.
All right, man. I know you got to run. Thank you so much for being here. Happy May Day.
Happy May Day.
Let's do this again. It's always good to chop it up with you.
Always, man. Always. I appreciate you throwing it down. I appreciate you putting it out there. And most of all, when we say Happy May Day, we need to remember that we are taking joy in the history of collective struggle against these oppressive practices. And that's why I like that, because happy something, it always comes off as like, hey, happy birthday, happy this, happy that. And it's like, no, amidst the space that is meant to kill our joy and kill our personhood and destroy our families and our communities, happy May Day to that, as we resist in the process.
Absolutely. That part.
There we go. That's what's up.
I'm not even gonna say nothing else, y'all. Y'all heard it. Happy May Day. Peace, y'all.
Peace.